Welcome back, my dear crime lovers. This is a new episode of the history of the American Mafia, the true American Mafia story, written and adapted to podcast by Fabio Fabiano, and translated and read by me, Grace Carlisi. I hope you enjoy this new episode. Today we're going to talk about several components of the Mafia that came from Castellammare del Golfo, and they were called Castellammaresi. In particular, we will, in detail, talk about Magaddino and Palmeri. But first, let me take you to Castellammare del Golfo. It's a seaside resort located halfway between Palermo and Trapani in Sicily. The location is also known for the practice of the mattanza, which is an antique local fishing technique. Thousands of tuna fish are concentrated in a portion of the sea called the Death Chamber, enclosed by nets attached to boats. The fishermen wait for the tuna, immersed in the high water up to their waists, armed with clubs and spikes. As the big fish are trapped inside the nets, men strike them with their weapons, killing them and colouring the blue sea into a rusty red. It is no coincidence that the term slaughter is used by journalists to indicate bloody mafia wars. It is no coincidence that in Castellammare del Golfo, in the period between the two world wars, there was the presence of mafia families of considerable importance with a transnational character that will determine a bloody feud between the Castellammarese clans. It is no coincidence that a bloody mafia war in the early years will be recorded in the USA as the Castellammarese War. We have studied closely the protagonists of the Castellammare Mafia who moved to the USA: Angelo Palmeri, Stefano Magaddino, and Salvatore Bonanno. In the following years, Salvatore Maranzano will be added to those names too. Stefano Magaddino was born in Castellammare del Golfo on the 10th of October 1891. He emigrated to the United States as a young man and chose Brooklyn for his new hometown. He came from a family of powerful and well-known mobsters. His arrival in the USA was anticipated by his reputation as a ruthless killer. He had no trouble integrating into the New York underworld and became the leader of a gang made up of his fellow old hometown emigrants specialized in robberies, extortion, scams and thefts, which allowed him to make a small fortune. In a short time, the criminal group imposed itself in New York, so much so that they became known as the Good Killers. If you haven't already downloaded the 2 episodes of this series about the Good Killers that I have previously prepared for you, so you may understand the extent of their so-called fame. The criminal group, the Good Killers, was accused of having committed the murder of Camillo Caiozzo as part of a feud, and therefore Magaddino was arrested. After being arrested by the police, Magaddino moved his operation base to the upper area of New York, settling in the city of Buffalo, where he was joined by his brother Antonio from Castellammare. Antonio, accused of various crimes in Italy, supported him in criminal activities including passport forgery, which was his particular area of expertise. As the gateway between Canada and the United States, Buffalo was a key city for the early US Mafia. It became even more important as an easy route for smuggling alcohol during the Prohibition Era. The first known boss from Buffalo was Benedetto Angelo Palmeri. He was born on January the 12th, 1878, in Castellammare del Golfo. Widely known as Angelo, and referred to by the Italian community as Don Nitto, his father Francesco was a successful merchant, and Angelo Palmeri grew up in an upper-middle-class family. He came to the United States as an adult. He reached New York City on September the 7th, 1906, and initially found a job there as a dock worker. In 1912, he moved to Buffalo and opened a tavern in Dante Place, which was actually a cover business for a gambling co-op. In August 1912, Palmeri was stopped, along with 11 other bartenders, by the Buffalo police during a blitz to crack down on gambling. He was convicted and fined $50. Palmeri married Rosaria Mistretta on October 5, 1913. She was the cousin of the wife, Vincenza, of Buffalo Mafia boss Giuseppe Di Carlo. This wedding guaranteed a period of closeness between Angelo Palmeri and Giuseppe Di Carlo. The two men were partners in Dante's Place saloon, and Palmeri became the boss's deputy in organising Di Carlo's underworld. According to a police report, they operated in different ways. Di Carlo was a quiet and peaceful man, while Palmeri was more prone to violence. In fact, the two protected each other. Palmeri's violent ways led him to an arrest in 1915 for attacking a police officer. He was convicted and fined $250. His reputation was bolstered by the nickname Buffalo Bill, which was given to him because he went around wearing cowboy hats and carrying a pistol in a holster. After the death of his wife, Palmeri moved from Buffalo to Niagara Falls, where he opened a cigar shop. The shop, as the majority at the time, was another cover business for another gambling racket that he'd managed to get together with Di Carlo. During the Prohibition era, with his brother Paul, Palmeri got into smuggling alcohol. The Palmeri brothers teamed up with the Siriani brothers, Don Simone Borruso, Joseph Sottile, and Canadian crime boss Rocco Perri to control liquor smuggling between Canada and Western New York. In 1921, Angelo Palmeri was accused of the murder of Emilio Ignazio, an inveterate gambler who hadn't paid a loan. During the trial, prosecutors failed to bring the victim's wife to the stand, as there were no other witnesses willing to identify Palmeri as the gunman who had fired from behind a parked car, hitting the victim in the head. Palmeri was released from prison due to insufficient evidence. After Giuseppe Di Carlo's death in July 1922, Angelo Palmeri returned to Buffalo. He moved with his family to the Di Carlo residence and temporarily took command of the mafia organization in Western New York. Palmeri imposed his protection on the owners of food shops, street vendors, and Italian restaurants. He also led a group of the Black Hand, who owned both legal and illegal businesses, including protectors or the so-called guardians and drug dealers. Palmeri was the leader of the Castellammarese clan, who had contacts and interests in almost all the USA, in cities like New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Detroit, and Chicago. In October of the same year, Angelo Palmeri convinced Magaddino, who had already become his close collaborator, to take the reins and become the boss of the organization himself. Magaddino accepted and appointed Palmeri as his advisor. When the Castellammarese War broke out in 1930, Palmeri supported Salvatore Maranzano. Buffalo Bill met regularly with Maranzano and mobster Joseph Bonanno in Brooklyn to plan a strategy to eliminate the boss Giuseppe Masseria. In his autobiography, A Man of Honor, Bonanno narrated his close relationship with Palmeri, recalling his visit to the latter's home during his honeymoon in November 1931 in Niagara Falls. Palmeri, after the end of the Castellammarese War, fell seriously ill. He died driving his car in the driveway of his house. He suffered a stroke on December 21st, 1932. He was 54 years old. During the Prohibition era, under Magaddino, the Buffalo family became an influential group and grew in power and began to establish itself nationally. Decisive were the business ties that Magaddino had formed with the Chicago outfit and the Detroit partnership in the Midwest with the Los Angeles family on the West Coast and with the Bonanno family of New York, led by his cousin Joe Bonanno. Magaddino and his family members became extremely wealthy, but it wasn't all plain sailing, and there was no lack of clashes. The Cleveland mobsters, that is the Pirello family, tried to expand the corn sugar business south to Pennsylvania and north to New York, to the detriment of Magaddino and his gang. This initiated the so-called Sugar War, which however ended quite quickly. Due to the enormous power of the Magaddinos, the Pirellos were driven out of New York. At the beginning of 1930s, Magaddino will take part in the Castellammarese War, to which I will dedicate another 2 episodes of this series, so stay tuned. In 1936, he was targeted by rivals, but his sister died by mistake. He then decided to move to the Niagara Falls area. There he opened a funeral home for cover, and for this reason he was nicknamed the Undertaker. At the end of the Prohibition era, he devoted himself to extortion, kidnapping, gambling, and usurious. He managed to escape several attacks by maintaining the leadership of his mafia family for about 50 years. He represented his township on Charles Lucky Luciano's commission, along with the 5 major families of New York, the Chicago outfit, and the families of Cleveland, Detroit, Boston, Philadelphia, and New Orleans. Stefano Magaddino died due to a heart attack in 1974 at the age of 82.